The reintroduction of ground effect machinery in 2022, combined with the fact that rear ride height is now important to performance, requires teams to race cars that are extremely low and stiff. And although this may look nice on pictures and is the best way to set up the car aerodynamically, it's actually bringing up a big question. Does performance mean more than human well-being? This low ride height means that driving circumstances can get uncomfortable, and a number of top drivers have often complained that the situation should not be tolerated indefinitely. And you might think now that we're 3 years into the regulations they might have been able to solve the problem, but no, they haven't. And this has caused for the drivers to lash out at the FIA and demanding different rules. So, as the FIA begins work on developing the 2026 standards, Norris feels that one factor that must be considered is preventing severe physical concerns. When asked if driver comfort might be enhanced, Norris responded, "Could it be better? And was it better a few years ago with the old cars? 100%. There's definitely certain people who think it's not bad and that it used to be worse many years ago and all of this stuff, but I think times have changed. I think we do complain sometimes, but certain things are also for good reason, for our own bodies and the safety and health side of things. So I think there's areas to improve on it, for sure." Norris stated that it was not the responsibility of teams to prioritize driver comfort, because their objective was to develop cars that move as quickly as possible. Instead, he thought it was up to the FIA to implement laws to ensure teams did not have to go to extremes. "I think it does need to be improved a little bit, because the teams just make the quickest cars, and then we drive them," he said. "There's certain times when it starts to have a toll. It's definitely not as bad as what it was 2 years ago. Things have improved since then, with porpoising and all of this. But you still have to run the cars extremely low and stiff and all of these things, and this takes a toll on you. I struggle a lot with my body and back and all of these things, and I have to do a lot now, which I didn't have to do a few years ago. I wouldn't say it's directly because of the car. I think a little of it is just naturally for me, I have to work on it, but I think things in the long term need to be improved, especially if I want to be here for many years." Norris's McLaren teammate Oscar Piastri feels that, while things have improved in recent years, there is still plenty that can be done to aid drivers. "I drove the 2022 car earlier in the year, and we've definitely made steps forward in terms of porpoising and improving comfort and stuff like that for us," he said. "So it's not as bad as what it was when these regulations first came in. But it's not quite as comfortable as the old cars were, so I think it is a point that is valid for us. We're going to drive the car how it is quickest, and you're never going to give up lap time for not having an achy body after the race. So you kind of need rules to stop that from us, because we're so competitive that we're just going to get the ultimate lap time out no matter what it takes." I feel like there was a good job addressing it, but it is something that we need to keep an eye on in the future. But it aren't just the McLaren boys that are not happy with the current bouncing on track, as Hamilton is still experiencing heavy bouncing in the all-new W15. The Briton recognises that the car has improved since last year's W14, but he emphasises that there is still more work to be done. "It's a work in progress, it's definitely improved. I think everyone has. And we're just going through the same sequence as always. The cars are still stiff and bumpy, as we know of this generation of cars. But the team have done a great job over winter," he said. Remember that Norris said it's up to the FIA to make sure the cars are driven higher? Well, it looks like he didn't get that idea from a stranger. According to McLaren team president Andrea Stella, Formula One rulemakers have all the tools they need to make the next generation of cars more pleasant for drivers. Are they really struggling with the bouncing? Or are they looking for ways to change the rules to something they can comprehend better over at the Papaya squad? We'll probably never know, but the issue is said to have been raised in Grand Prix Drivers Association (GPDA) meetings with requests for action. World champion Max Verstappen is said to have discussed the issue with the FIA at the season-opening Bahrain Grand Prix, amid requests for significant improvements to the new rules established in 2026. Verstappen said that, "End of the straight with full load, the impact is too high with the low ride heights." As the FIA begins work on fresh regulations for 2026, there is hope that the next generation of cars will learn from current experiences. And, with a better grasp of why cars need to be driven low and stiff, Stella believes there is no justification not to improve things significantly. All these learnings should definitely be taken into account in designing the 2026 regulations, he said. It will be inconvenient and an incomplete a job if, in 2026, the cars have similar kind of issues like in 2022. Or if we have again unintended issues because we still have time to study, and even the tools in a few years are further improved. We should touch the ground in good shape in 2026 because what happened in 2022 was very challenging. At times it was a discomfort for drivers, and it was at times extreme, and it was at times dangerous because the cars became quite unstable. So definitely we need to target to be in a better shape, and we have the tools now to do that. Stella confesses that F1 teams were surprised by how the latest generation of ground effect cars performed when they were originally introduced in 2022. The 2022 regulations surprised with some unintended challenges, he said. We have gone a long way in understanding these challenges. This is also the reason why these cars are much more comfortable to drive now. But they can still be quite tricky, because if you take the high-speed sections, they tend to bounce a little bit. They have a little bit of porpoising, and the cars can get pretty snappy because of this phenomenon. It's not only the comfort, it's also how much on the edge the car becomes when you start to add these dynamic oscillations. Let's switch back to Mercedes, where things are still going rough, and where they have said that the W15 is a step forward from the rebellious W13 and W14 cars that launched F1's latest ground effect era in 2022 and 2023, primarily in terms of handling predictability. Russell was asked whether there was any specific hangover from Mercedes' prior cars that was still felt in the W15. I would say this year's car is a totally different race car, he said, to the point that the things we learned from last year in the way we were setting the car up, we will need to approach it differently this year. So, there's a lot to learn about this, and it feels much closer to how a race car should feel, but the one area that we need to continue to work on is probably the bouncing that we're seeing. We got caught up with a bit of bouncing. We were pushing the car really aggressively, but as I said, we're dealing with a totally different beast this year, whereas 2022-2023, they were both cut from the same cloth. Russell's bouncing relates to braking stability, not the porpoising and bouncing issues Mercedes had with the Zeropod W13 in the 2022 season. During pre-season testing, it was discovered that Mercedes was among the worst cars to be bouncing at its front end when its drivers applied the brakes for Bahrain's tight, downhill right-hand turn the 8 hairpin. Russell stated that Mercedes is still pushing the boundaries and exploiting the limitations of the car. So, 3 years on from the start of the new ground effect era, I think a lot of teams can still enter this circuit and set the car up in a too low and aggressive manner. But it's always a fine line because that's where the downforce is. What are your thoughts on the ground effect regulations? Should the teams just focus on the performance side, or should they take their drivers into account, even if it costs performance? It's a thin line. But the teams seem to be choosing performance over drivers nowadays. After all, they all want to win, right? Let us know your thoughts in the comments down below and subscribe for more F1 content. We'll see you in the next video.